Hey everybody, how's it going? So welcome to the first episode of a new Planet Coaster Tips for Realism series. Now this series uses my own experience working with real life theme park design to help you create more realistic Planet Coaster parks. Now the first episode has been broken up into topics and then into two levels, basic and pro, with the idea being that the basic level gives new or console players some kind of knowledge of theme park design, and then the pro level taking it up a notch for more experienced players that may have access to things like Theme Maker's Toolkit. And in this episode, we're talking all about park layout and introducing you to some of the topics for future deep dive episodes. So your park layout is the backbone of your build, and remember that the key to any successful realism is that nothing should be left to the imagination. So if you want somebody to see something, then they should see it. So let's look at the things to consider when planning park layouts. So my biggest bit of advice is to create a park profile in advance. Decide what and how many attractions you want. So what coasters, flat rides, transport rides, water rides, etc. And then build to that brief. You also want to agree an overarching theme for your park and then thread that through everything that you build. So for example, an adventure theme or a fantasy theme, or you may just keep it completely generic. Now understand the different ride types and also their experiences, and then where possible don't duplicate those experiences unless you fully intend to. So you need to decide in advance what's the most appropriate attractions for the profile that you've designed. And you also need to analyse and plan your terrain in advance, so you need to work with what you've got, but don't be afraid to change the terrain. And if you do, make it subtle and keep slope inclines for paths narrow. You're talking no more than 20 degrees. But also take advantage of lookout points next to water, or you can use terrain within flower beds to obscure the guest's sightline. So zoning is very different to theming, and parks are split into zones or clusters, and they may cross multiple themes, but they'll share services and facilities. So these are typically things like food, drink, retail, toilets, access to cash, and these would also typically have two headline attractions with some smaller supporting attractions as well. But you just need to decide if these are destination areas where your path comes to an end, or a walkthrough where the main path travels through it or alongside it. Now you'll typically want to use destination zones at the outskirts of the park, or walkthrough ones where you're trying to encourage guest circulation. But remember that destination zones create a dead end, and the only way out is the way you came in. There's no golden rule for how many there should be, or how they should be configured. And another question that I get asked a lot is all about facilities and how many there should be. And again, there is no golden rule for what facilities such as toilets and area requires. Every country has different laws for this, but the guiding principle is ample and freely available. So one thing to remember is that you'll also need disabled toilets as well, and other facilities to consider would be first aid, phones, lockers, cash machines, stroller rentals, and you also will need to include some kind of appropriate building for these. Make sure you can move your guests around your park, so use the principle of spread, circulate and space. Spread your guests around the park by placing large attractions at the edge of your park, make it easy to circulate your guests around your park, and make sure that you have enough space for them in areas where you're going to attract a lot of them. Make sure that your paths are also set up to allow for circulation. You can use one big circular path to force their rotation, or a wheel and spoke pattern which allows access to any other area through the centre of the park. So I get asked about area transitions quite a lot, and there is no real golden bullet answer for these. I mean, you can use physical barriers such as bodies of water, hills, landscapes, or buildings to obscure views and define clearly separate areas, or you can leave space between, or you can just let it blend. You just need to decide whether you're going to theme a single ride or an entire area. So guests are going to need space to park their cars, and at the basic level you can use the tarmac terrain paint and then use walls to create the lines and then also add your cars. But remember that cars won't all be the same colour and they won't all park in perfectly straight lines. A typical park entrance will need tickets, turnstiles, entrance plazas, guest services, security, retail, games, food and annual pass offices. You're going to want to monetize busy areas, and you can do this by placing game stalls where you have many guests. You can also use vending machines to fill in small gaps. You can use grab and go units where you don't want people to congregate, and then full on restaurant buildings if you have the space to place them. Use solid fences to hide unsightly things that you can't otherwise obscure. Use flower beds, fountains and trees to bring life to your parks, and then also have a colour palette and a flower type for your park and stick to it throughout. You should only really change them out when an area you're theming demands it. Hotels are completely optional and not every theme park has got them, so if you are going to use them, then at least make them look like a hotel. There'll be large buildings with lots of windows, and if you're also using a glass front entrance, then you just need to decorate the reception area too. You'll need to allocate space in your park for warehouse and facilities. Now, these at least need to be represented. Make sure that all of your desired rides have a maintenance strategy too, so build transfer tracks, maintenance sheds, and also make sure that these have access to a road or at least a park path, and these are fenced off. And also remember to clutter these up using decorative items such as bins, pallets, fans, barrels. You know, you get the idea. Your park may have staff working there that you may never see, so make sure you allocate space for offices somewhere back of house. And remember that they'll need some kind of road or path to access them. So now you know all of the components of a park layout, we should probably talk about where you put them all. And of course, you already know where the car parks and entrances go. Your major attractions like roller coasters would normally be placed on the outsides of the park so that you can better control your guest circulation and spread, and your flat rides are used for space filling to soak up the crowds. Dark and indoor rides require a lot of space as they are just warehouses, so place these wherever you can fit them. But they're usually found somewhere in the middle, or towards the back of the park. Your food and drink units should service and support the zone that they are in, and they can be placed just about anywhere within that zone, wherever it fits. So can your toilets and facilities, just remember, ample and freely available. Your hotel can also be anywhere. Some parks have them inside the park boundary, and some have them on the outside. There's also usually a hotel guest only entrance too. Your service and admin buildings tend to be tucked away out of sight on the outskirts of the park, with a road servicing them, but sometimes they are placed wherever you just have space, like behind a building or a ride. Then your path should create a circle or spoken wheel pattern. You can use decorations to fill in the gaps, but also think about monetizing any commercial dead spots between attractions with games and stalls and gift shops. And don't forget major rides. Exit via the gift shop. So those are the tips for the basic level, but now let's crank it up a notch and look at the pro tips in a different park. Balance the attractions you choose with the profile of guests that you're trying to attract, so avoid duplicating ride experiences without intending to. So for example, stand-up coasters versus floorless coasters, Eurofighters versus dive coasters, and in the flat ride world, rotor towers versus drop towers, Enterprise versus Starflyer, and so on, you get the picture. Every attraction should feel like it has a reason for adding it. The decision should feel alive, and every attraction should have a purpose. Now, not every attraction should look to beat the last one. Your park should feel fluid and dynamic in that respect. Theming and decoration are important, but also consider how rides operate. Do they need operator booths? What about escape platforms, health and safety signage, specific disabled access, staff positioning on platforms? This all helps with knowing what facilities you need, like maintenance and training, and if you understand capacities, you know how long your queues need to be. The coaster 4-meter method will also allow you to create some realistic coaster layouts. So ensure to include compliant signage, fine details such as electric cables or under-track heaters, staff positions and their push buttons, and remember, if you want someone to see it, they need to see it, so if you see it, build it. And lastly, change your terrain. Remember the 20-degree rule. No slope should be steeper than 20 degrees. And where you have stairs, make sure you include a ramp and handrails. For larger hills, think about how your disabled guests get around. Hint, they'll probably use transport rides. Use the terrain paint to vary how it all looks, and to think about where grass would grow and where it would struggle, where colour flowers would be and where they're not, and then also where rocks may be and whether they were placed there naturally or placed by design. Even flat land is not flat, so make sure you make very subtle changes. So your zones should be connected to your maintenance or service roads somehow, either by an actual road or via the park's paths. Add functions to zones such as maps, queue time boards, etc. Think about interconnectivity like transport rides, disabled access, emergency procedures. Zones should be self-reliant hubs that can share staff resources, retail opportunities, and should be destinations in their own right, but also allow guests to have the space to circulate within them as well, even if they are dead-end destination zones. Facilities should be appropriately sized for the footfall of the area. Now, you may only use one in-game toilet, but the size of the building should be reflected in real life. So typically a toilet cubicle is up to 2 meters wide, so if you did want to have 10, then you need to allow 20 meters in-game. And next, locker buildings should be the correct size for the number of lockers that you claim to be in there, so a 4 meter square will not hold 100 lockers. And if you do want to be truly accurate, then fully detail these out too. And lastly, don't forget CCTV. They should be in place inside buildings and on catwalks and on lift hills, but probably not in your toilets. Think of how guests travel to different areas of the park and what routes they use. Do transport rides factor into this? What happens in an emergency? Where do guests go if a ride breaks down? What do you have in the area that actually attracts the guests? How close are the vital facilities to them? Consider emergency situations, but make sure your park is fluid with no pinch points. If you struggle to transition your themed areas, then you can blend themes that share the same building material palette. So for example, Tudor England and a certain pirate building share the same white stucco and black wood. And then pirate and a beach theme share foliage, driftwood and water. The beach theme can then be shared with adventure through certain wildlife and terrain. Adventure can be shared with mines, mines with spooky, and so on. Just don't create a hard border where everything in your theme suddenly stops, because this creates a really awkward void for you to fill. Now, large parks will use the overarching park theme as the link between themed areas. So, for example, the consistent style of queue-line fencing, colour palettes and building architecture. They should all have the same base to it, but the materials wrapping around it also change. Now, real-life examples of this are Alton Towers with Gothic, Thorpe Park with island and coastal style theming. Gardaland has Desert Adventure, Hyder Park has Bavarian, and of course we all know what Legoland is. And even the generic themed parks like Cedar Point and Canada's Wonderland have an overarching theme, even if they sometimes have individual themed areas. Kit out your car parks with coach parking, VIP, public transport, drop-offs, and start to think about traffic management. Map out your traffic flows and solve bottlenecks that you may have. Work out your capacity of your park and make sure that your car park is the correct size. So the general rule is for every 2 guests, expect 1 car, and for every 100 guests, expect 1 coach. Now you should find that your car park will end up being about half the total area of your entire park. Make sure everything is the correct size. The buildings need to be big enough to house the staff and the stuff that they contain, even if you choose not to detail inside. So ensure that your plazas are big enough to cope with peak traffic at the beginning and the end of the day, and include passive services like bins, benches and lighting. But also remember the fine details like parking ticket machines, drain covers, park maps and promo posters. Make sure your food, retail and games units are all the correct size. You'll need to allocate space for staff rooms, kitchens and offices, even if you're not going to kit these out and detail them. But experiment with restaurant interiors. In general, you'll need to allow an average of 1 to 1.5 metres squared per person, so think that a 4 by 4 metre space would comfortably hold about 16 people. But this does get a little looser the bigger the space is. And also start to experiment with making your own versions of game stalls, because these are easier to place in your park than the in-game ones. Start to build from life and copy how things are done. Watch some time-lapse videos of buildings being built and the order in which they're put together. Foundations, services, walls, detail, roof, and then build your things in the same order. You'll probably start using Theme Maker's Toolkit items, and you may start creating entire buildings with them. That's fine. Beams are your best friend because they're so versatile. Becoming familiar with another creator's Theme Maker's Toolkit items will boost your parks, because these artists can create things that you just can't with in-game pieces. Make sure that your hotel is the correct size and account for everything that it needs, so rooms, housekeeping, reception, social spaces, gardens, maintenance. An average but well equipped room is around 64 metres squared, so that's 8 by 8 metres, and a corridor is between 2 and 4 metres wide. And the hotels are typically on multiple floors, so if you do want to take it to the next level, decorate every room and every area in the hotel, even if it's not playable in game. Include back-of-house facilities that are needed in your park, so things like garbage and recycling centres, ride maintenance, groundskeeping, service roads, water treatment, electricity substations and so on. Your rides will also need attention too, so start to kit out your maintenance sheds. Your transfer tracks should be the correct size and the correct length, and sheds should accommodate all of your trains. Fine details on the transfer track really helps bring these things to life, so you may find that building from real life will help you here. Make the offices the correct size for your teams. Space requirements do vary, but 2 meters squared per desk is a rough guide. Now, if you do want to take it to the extreme, identify every single person that would work in the office and add up the total space that they would occupy, and then build around that. Consider multiple floors or multiple buildings, but make sure you include canteen type facilities too. So this is a new one. Make sure you use correct fencing between rides and open areas. Ensure that a secure area is just that. Think about what happens if a guest is too close to a ride. Assess the risk of injuries and incidents and use fences or restricted areas to reduce that risk. And also fence off other risks such as sudden terrain changes, water bodies, restricted areas, maintenance, etc. Make sure that you use the correct compliance signs of the correct colours, of the correct wording, of the correct size, and the locations for your own country. And fences should be the correct height and also the correct type. And lastly, start to consider how your park fits into the wider world and create references to it from within the park, so signs like exit or to a destination. There is a world outside your park and your park belongs inside it. Connect your park to a main road. Include some surrounding things like a town or a farm or countryside or houses, whatever. Your park should feel part of a bigger world rather than being isolated. So that brings us to the end of the first top tips video, and of course each one of these topics is worthy of their own deep dive video, so if you're not already, please make sure you are subscribed because then you'll know when they are released. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, take care of yourselves, please keep safe, and until next time, bye bye.